Welcome to Extra Takes, hosted by Northland Church Senior Pastor Dr. Joshua Laxton. Join us each week as Pastor Josh reveals the rest of the story behind his sermons. We'll discuss how those who follow Christ can live out a biblical vision for the church in our world today.
Well, hello, Northland family and friends. Welcome to another episode of Extra Takes. I am your host, the sanctified version of Ric Flair. Woo! PJ.
You're still on about that?
I'm still on. I thought about, man, if I was really witty and very quick-witted, I could have said the sanctified version of Ric Flair would have said, to beat the God, you have to, or to be the God, you got to beat the God, and no one can ever beat God. Because because he was the one who used to say, to be the man, you got to beat the man.
Yeah, So I remember the Wooo. I don't remember that quote.
You remember that? Oh, yeah. And then he would do his little step, and he would go, woo!
Of course, yeah. So did that just come out? I mean, I know, throughout the weekend, I think it developed a little more.
It did, yeah. It did develop a little bit more. Because I got it really excited, as I was telling you and Tom about. I got really excited about that part.
Yeah, on Wednesday.
I'm like, that was.
Yeah.
That was an epiphany.
It was. Wait. Did you look at the notes?
No,
That's the word I used.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Very cool. I did not look at the notes. So
I used the word epiphany. So I'll ask you about that epiphany in a little bit. So let's get digging into it. We have a little bit of a show and tell.
Yeah, so. and if you're watching this on YouTube, yes, I put at least the slide deck that I put together. Like always. On the TED series, I always put together a slide deck. I give it to them, and then they doctor it up. So you don't see the doctored version. You'll see the things that I put together.
Cool. Yeah. There's seems to be a lot of good illustrations. So we'll walk through some of those today. So we are in week 2 of the TED series, Faith and Technology. This is June 21st and 22nd. Now let me walk through the outline for each of these TED Talks, then we'll dig in. So TED Talk Part 1, you gave us an introduction and a review of last week. We talked about the etymology of technology. Then we looked back at what is technology, this idea of technology being a friend or a foe. For the record, people could have done the homework and just not sent it to you.
Well, it could have. Yeah, I mean,
I did the homework. I gave it to you.
You gave it
on Extra Take.
But I asked people, I think it's Saturday. I'm like, how many of you did homework? I don't know, 2 or 3 hands. So I stopped asking.
You did. Your ego couldn't handle.
No, y'all didn't do the homework, slackers.
Okay, that's good. So technology, friend or foe. If you haven't done the homework, it's starting to pile up on you, right? Because we have homework this week too. But really good. I would definitely. I think a bunch of the listeners of Extra Take probably did their homework.
Maybe. Hopefully.
I'm trying to suck up to our listeners and viewers. So technology, friend or foe, and then we looked at the faith framework, the 5 elements of faith. Then you gave us this progression of technology in the Bible. So Jubal, Jubal, Tubal Cain, and then we looked at Babylon and Babel. And then you gave us this question, why did these humans want to progress in technological advancement? And you said to build a better life and society. And then we looked at, there was these kind of 2 answers. We had answer the part 1, and then we had answer in part 2. And really this idea of humans by our very nature want to experience flourishing. Uh-oh. I'm
listening to you. You keep on going. So if you're watching this, I'm going to exit the screen because I got to get a book. Because,
So in addition to this answer of humans by our very nature want to experience flourishing, that's where we saw the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard. I want to ask you about that.
Okay.
And then you said we ended this first section by saying, how do you think we're doing? How do you think we're doing using tech to build flourishing lives and societies? And we had Hollywood through 4 video clips at least give us glimpses and glimmers of how we're doing that. Now, TED Part 2, that's when we looked at this awesome idea of glimmers of hope and gloom of sin. We looked at this Romans passage. And then that second answer, that question, if you remember, why do humans want to progress in technological advancement? And that second answer is flourishing is embedded in creation. That's when you got excited.
Yeah.
That's when we talked about periodic table and all that goes into it. And then you gave us this conclusion and this question that really helped ask is how we are making, creating, consuming, using, stewarding, managing technology, building a life, environment, and society that glorifies the Lord, or is it building a life, environment, society that glorifies the self? So again, an idea that we go back to all the time, are we being made more into the image of Jesus or into the image of Adam? And then that's where you gave us the homework of the tech face-off. So we'll get into that. So let's start with my favorite questions to ask you. You got a little upset at me last week. We'll see how it goes this week. Can you describe this week in one word?
Building.
Oh, see? That's the type of word I'm looking for.
Well, yeah, but last week was an introduction.
Yeah, but building. Why building?
Because I ended there because what I really try to set up the entire time is that tech that we're creating, making, using, consuming to build something, to build a better life in society.
Yeah.
That's what tech's doing. And so when you look at even what God's doing in Genesis 1, he's actually creating, making technology, using it to build, when I say a better, enhanced creation structure, whereby life can not only function, but actually flourish. So he's building something.
Great. I like that word.
Yeah.
Good job.
Thanks.
This other question that I love to ask, what's a big takeaway from this?
Well, it's easy.
I think we know.
The periodic table.
Yeah.
And the raw materials and how God used the raw materials to actually create forms of technologies.
Yeah, that's I can't wait to get there because we'll see if you have another Ric Flair moment. So before we get there, this question about, why do humans want to progress, and by our very nature we want to experience flourishing, this is when you dug into the Human Flourishing program at Harvard. So what takeaways did you get from looking at and learning about that human flourishing?
Well, so this is a book that I would recommend. Now, it's been updated since this. It's 2084 by John Lennox. But on page 89 of this book, and we're reading it as a staff, senior staff, he writes, he's talking about this philosopher, John Gray, who is actually an atheist. I'm going to share what John Gray says here in just a second. But Lennox is engaging with John Gray, and he says this: as John Gray says, there would appear to be a strong element of Gnosticism in this attitude, because he has just quoted him. In his perceptive review, Giles Fraser writes approvingly of Gray's insistence on the idea, and here it is, the insistence on the idea that science or technology can somehow deliver us from the sort of questions that have driven some of us to God. Questions about mortality, for instance, is every bit as superstitious as any religious belief. For many, technology and science function in today's society very much the same way as magic once did. They both represent the fantasy that there can be some quick fix to the challenges of being human. What is he getting at? Is that we enter into the realm of science and technology even to the lowering or the movement away from God in a way that would fix whatever challenges that we are experiencing as a human being. Like so this is what philosophers are saying, is that we're moving in this modern era into technology and science to actually give us the quick fixes of the challenges we face of being human. Now, but listen to later on. This is just a page later. So So the author of this book goes on to say, C.S. Lewis wrote these words, talking about the words from The Abolition of Man, after he had become a Christian, yet atheist John Gray regards them as prophetic value, even for those who do not share Lewis's theological convictions. Gray also reminds us that the attempt to use science and technology to upgrade humanity, again, that's the whole idea, is to enhance our life and society. So Gray also reminds us that the attempt to use science and technology to upgrade humanity is far from new. He cites both the medieval Jewish myth of a human-like being made of dust or mud, called the golem, and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, published in 1818. In Gray's view, now again, Gray is this atheist philosopher. In Gray's view, here's what Gray writes: the attempt to create an artificial human being risks making a monster. So what he's saying is that we have tried to use the modern human being has tried to use science and technology to upgrade their life, and in the end, if they're not careful, they will create a monster. So again, it's innate within us to want to upgrade, to enhance, to improve, for our life to experience flourishing.
Yeah. So when we're trying to use technology in that way, how does that clash with us trying to experience flourishing?
So when we're trying to use science this way, well, and that's the whole idea of what we got at with Hollywood, is that there will always be glimmers of hope. I mean, you don't think that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, oh, he's alive, but it's a stinking monster. So there will always be that glimmer that you have of hope because of what technology, in some sense, over-promises, but it will always under-deliver. If we do it in a manner of, when I say Genesis 4, Genesis 11, that we're creating, because what was interesting about even Genesis 4, these were Lamech's sons, okay? Well, right after we're introduced to these sons, we're also, once again, reintroduced to Lamech of how he killed a man. What do you think he killed a man with? Probably one of the tools that his son created and forged through bronze and iron. Yeah. I mean, he could have killed him with his bare hands. Yeah. But chances are, he probably killed him with a tool.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. If we go back to Genesis 4 really quick, that is, so Lamech's sons, that's the line of Cain. Yep. Not the line of Seth. So is there anything we can draw from this technology coming out of the line of Cain?
Well, no, and that's where, people so some people they're like, oh, technology is bad because it comes from the line of Cain. And then when you look at Genesis 11, technology is bad because they're making bricks and tar to build a city. I do not read it that way because when, again, at the very, and that's why the epiphany of the periodic table and what God's doing, all they're doing in Genesis 4 and Genesis 11, they're doing the elements of what human beings do. But how we relate, create, and operate, if we do not do it for the glory of God and our glory, but the glory of self, it exposes the fallen nature of man. And anytime we relate, create, and operate for our glory, it will always overpromise and underdeliver, because it is marred and it is rooted in sin, which is the unraveling of love for God, thereby disobeying Him. But if we do relate, create, and operate for our primary love of God, then what it does, it actually brings to order in a way that actually reflects who God is.
Yeah. Yeah, so even though they were in the line of Cain, they had the opportunity to relate, create, and operate in a way that glorified God, not glorified themselves.
Well, that's where God did not create Adam and Eve to sit around, hold hands, sing Kumbaya. He said, I want you to subdue I want you to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and then I want you to exercise dominion. I want you to rule and reign on my behalf. And then he puts Adam in the garden. He says, I want you to tend to it. I want you to keep it. I want you to cultivate the garden. I want you to exercise kind of an authority over the garden under my authority. So he's doing more than just standing around singing, praise songs. Sure. That's where, I feel like we have so domesticated the gospel gospel, or so spiritualize it to the point where we don't see the actual glory of God in everything that we do, in how we create, make technology, how we consume, use, steward technology, how we look at our vocation, how we look at our relationships, how we look at really the 7 days in a week versus just the 1 day a week. And so what I'm hoping to do through the way I teach and the way, God has just wired me to really study. Well, again, I'm not the only one who studies the Bible like this, but to really try to capture people's imagination of what it truly means to be human after the image and likeness of Jesus. That he really is coming again, and he's going to bring a new city, and then for all of eternity we're going to be relating, creating, and operating. I mean, like, that's what we're going to do. I think we will be building technology. I think we will be doing that for all of eternity, because when that happens, even though we will be known as we are known by him, that doesn't mean that we will be, when I say fully complete, that no, we will continue to learn for all of eternity. I believe that we will continue to progress in the image and likeness of Jesus. I believe that we will create things that, I mean, I don't know all of the specificities of what we will be doing, but here's what I do. It will be a city. There will be life. And what we see at the very beginning, I believe in some shape, form, or fashion, we will be doing for all of eternity.
Fascinating. So looking at the Human Flourishing Program, these 6, are there any of the 6 you want to drill deeper into? Well,
so let's look at it again. I'll pull it up on my little screen behind me. There's all of the 2 ball. All right, so you got the Human Flourishing. But let's just think about what are some of the things that have been created to, in some sense, make us happier and more satisfied. What do you think? What do you think has been created?
So entertainment.
Okay, so entertainment, yeah. So entertainment, movies, TV shows, platforms. So Netflix, Hulu, Paramount. And so depending on what you like, depending on what really is going to be dependent upon what platform, and you're like, I like them all, like we do. And so we have like 5 different platforms. Sports, yeah. Happiness and lifestyle. These are things that have been created.
Hobbies.
Yeah. Mental and physical health. So when I was training for an Ironman, like I basically keep that kind of same rhythm. So I know how to kind of train, and so I do that, and that's kind of for my physical health, for my mental well-being. There's the science and the technology of getting good sleep. Well, that's part of it. So me getting good sleep and understanding the science and in some sense the techniques, thus technology, behind getting good sleep is for my mental health, my mental well-being. So
crossword puzzles.
Oh yeah, I do know that you. I know that you like crossword puzzles. Well, my wife would say crushing candy is for her mental health.
I didn't know I like crossword puzzles.
Because you told me.
Really?
Yeah. Well, then you wanted to. So you did in the White Elephant Exchange this past year. You did some kind of form of some complex puzzle the impossible puzzle that you brought for the group, but you ended up taking it home yourself.
I did,
which was very selfish. But nevertheless, I guess it was for your mental health.
It's not impossible.
So, because you did it.
I completed it. Well, it's in my office.
Oh, good. For your mental health, so meaning and purpose. Now, but here's what I would say about meaning and purpose. All right, so. What's fascinating in our society today, people are finding meaning and purpose in the technology. So if you've ever watched the movie Ready Player One, they went into the virtual reality. They went into the oasis, is what they called the virtual world. They went into it to find meaning and purpose. It actually became their meaning and purpose. Sure. But that was one of the things that at the very end they called, like, that's not the meaning and purpose of life. Sure, it's fun. And it does satisfy us to a degree, but it does not take the place of life. Like we still are now. The thing about Hollywood, that movie never said what the meaning of life was, other than it showed people by the year it was like 2040, like this was the meaning and purpose of life, and
Yeah.
That clearly wasn't it. Yeah. So what we're seeing today in our particular context is that our culture has actually lost the larger narrative of what the meaning and purpose is, which is why the Christian worldview, if we can show them that the meaning and purpose is the worship of King Jesus, for he is the King of all kings, he's the Lord of all lords, and that if he's the meaning and he's the center of your life, he begins to inform those things that people would think is the meaning and purpose of life. And so that's why that's so important. But they would say, like the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard is like, you need meaning and purpose. Then character and virtue. Now, again, that's morality. So we, like that's the essence of God's image, is that his name is consisted of who he is, his character, his characteristics, his attributes, his nature. And so if you're going to be flourishing, you need to have those things. So what we're seeing, again, here's what we're seeing today, and we have a congregant, a member at Northland whose son is actually over this program, which is pretty cool. And so he started sending me a lot of things last night about this program.
Awesome.
But if you think about character and virtue, morality, and we're living in a day and age where true character, morality has experienced an erosion. We don't know what's right anymore, what's wrong anymore. It's like, this is a true postmodern thought. You just do whatever you want to do. Truth is relative, so therefore if truth is relative, that means morality is relative. And so if morality is relative, and so one person would see this is good, the other person would see this is bad, one person would see this is right, the other person would see, well, that's wrong. How can you have flourishing when you have a society that doesn't have the same meaning and purpose, and therefore they don't have the same ethics, they don't have the same morality, they don't have the same character and virtue? And so that's why, again, the Christian faith is so important to, I actually think, the enhancement of life and society, because we actually have a faith that's going to inform, and a worldview that will inform and in some sense put everybody on the same page. Again, now we're not going to force that down people's throat. We're going to show them. We're going to demonstrate it to them through our life and through the corporate life of the church, okay? But then you got close social relationships. That means that we need, and see, this is what we saw in Ready Player One. This is what we're seeing in social media. Social media was created to help with social relationships, but what we have found, and I was listening to a podcast today, that actually social media has eroded close social relationships. Yeah. In fact, there is a book by Sherry Turkle, Turkle, called Reclaiming Conversation. And what she talks about there is how social media has unraveled our ability to actually physically, humanly communicate with people in person. And so again, where a technology was created to try to help, it actually has eroded there. But we need close social relationships, financial material stability. And so when you think about financial stability, I mean, a lot of things in this world is based upon technology. A lot of vocations and careers are based upon technology, and thus financial stability. So think about, and this is where, so Christians, we got to think deeply about this. So when the culture moved from an agrarian society to an industrial society, they were going to eliminate a lot of things, and therefore they were going to threaten human flourishing. And then when we moved from an industrial society to a when I say a digital or a technological society, then again people's jobs, financial stability got threatened. So those are things that we will think deeply about, because when people are threatened, they no longer experience, or they think that they could experience flourishing. So this was, so again, these 6 domains are really important. But there was another group that I could have showed, and it's called the Thriving Cities Group. So this was an organization based out of the University of Virginia. Well, they've recently, when I say they were birthed out of the University of Virginia, but they're no longer connected to the University of Virginia. And they actually have what they call the human ecology, the 6 endowments of human ecology. So these are the 6 elements are these 6 endowments that are needed for a thriving city. So again, it's this idea of flourishing cities. And so here's what they say. You need the good. And so this is social mores, ethics, and virtues. So very similar to what Harvard said.
Yep.
The true, you need knowledge and learning. Like you know, and so one of the things that we are seeing that AI is doing is eroding knowledge and learning, because kids are letting AI, like things like ChatGPT and these other large language models, to learn for them. The beautiful, I love here where they talk about the beautiful, creativity, aesthetics, and design. And so part of thriving cities is to actually start seeing the beauty, the aesthetics, how you even design things in the city for what they call the beautiful, because that enhances humans, that enhances cities. They talk about the just. So you need a well-ordered political and civic life. One of the things that I love about this is because, again, these are structures, methods, policies, techniques. These are technologies that human beings would come and go, this is what it means to have a well-ordered society. So when you think about the antiquity, so even before God gave Moses the law, there was even before then there was this society in Babylon, or what would become Babylon, the Hammurabi code, Hammurabi's code of conduct. Again, when you think about laws and policies and how, like those, again, those are techniques, those are structures. So those are systems that have been created. So again, these systems, methods, techniques that have been created for the practical purposes of living. So when you think about a well-ordered political and civic life, you need technology to actually have that. The prosperous, the economic life, and everything that goes into the economy and an economic life, and then the sustainable, natural environment. How do you sustain the environment? So I actually love both of those lists, because while there are some overlap, there are actually some differences of how they would say the cities. If you want a thriving city, you need these 6 endowments.
I think that's great. I think that list, like you said, there's it's a robust list that there's a bit of overlap, but there's some uniqueness as well. And I think it's just helpful for us to know. In addition to Harvard, there's another organization out there that's thinking deeply about it. And if you're interested in this area, definitely encourage you to check out Thriving Cities from UVA. You looking at another book? What's going on over there?
I thought I had it because I thought I had it. It was an article in Christianity Today, so it's at my home office, and they were interacting with the Harvard Human Flourishing Program. Okay. And here's what was fascinating. You know what GDP stands for? Like
gross domestic product.
Okay, so in societies and nations where they had a high gross domestic product, it didn't necessarily mean that the people measured high on human flourishing. Yeah. It was actually in the countries that had a lower GDP that their human flourishing measurements actually measured higher.
Like Scandinavia?
I can't remember.
Okay. Yeah.
The countries, but that was a huge takeaway. So what's the takeaway? The takeaway is we don't necessarily need all of the technologies that we think we need in order to experience human flourishing.
Yeah.
That was a huge takeaway. And so I wish I had that article, but Christianity Today, if you just Google Christianity, but you have to be a subscriber of Christianity Today in order to access that article. But it was an article recently by Christianity Today that used those 6 markers and went a little bit deeper.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to these movie clips. We used 4 movie clips: Ready Player One, Limitless, WALL-E, and Moneyball. You had a lot to choose from.
Oh gosh.
What drew you to these 4?
Well, so a couple of things. One, they were either PG-13 and lower, so that drew me to that. Yeah,
I was thankful for that because
Yeah.
Paige was in the service.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I knew, I was like, nothing's gonna happen. But when Wally came up, she was so excited.
She yeah. Well, and so I wanted, and so the reason why they came up is because I believe that they highlighted 4 different types of technology.
Sure.
You had the virtual, digital.
Yeah.
And then you had the substance,
Yeah.
pill.
Yeah.
Then you had, like, basically when I call it self-care, creation care.
Yeah.
Because with Wally, they destroyed Earth. That's the whole point. They destroyed Earth, through, in some sense, how they develop things.
And then they destroyed themselves.
And then they destroyed themselves. So there was this So technology literally eroded the essence of humanity and eroded the structure, creation that they lived in.
Yeah.
And then Moneyball I thought it was a really good movie showing systems and techniques. And because I knew those movies well, it was 4 different, because I know that there were other movies that went into like systems and techniques, like another one, like Systems. I could have used Divergent because they had created these systems, these factions was what they called. And they didn't want anybody who was considered divergent, or it would have ruined their system.
Yeah.
But by doing that, they eroded the whole human being because they forced them into a faction.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I could have used Divergent.
That's good.
Hunger Games could have used them as a system.
Sure.
So anyways, there were so many to kind of really choose from, but which one would have, So those were the reasons why
That's great.
I chose them.
When I think Moneyball, I think all the other ones were probably ones that you would think, yeah, this kind of makes sense. The whole systems piece is one that I don't think is as obvious when you're thinking of technology. So I think you talked about that last week, and I think that was helpful for me and others. So a clip of Moneyball to further that idea of systems being a technology, I think was helpful as well.
If I was more prepared for these, I would, or let's put it this way, if I had more time to prepare for these. But there was a book written in the early 1900s when and again you had this move into kind of this industrial age. I forget who wrote it, but it was on the science of management. It was what it was called. It was the scientific something of management. Okay. So it really is where organizational management, organizational leadership was birthed, but it was the whole science behind how you structure these industrial manufacturing plants for the efficiency and the effectiveness of production. And so it was interesting because I was reading that book and it's very technical. So the first part, like really the introduction, the first chapter, I really love it. I mean, it's a book, maybe 80, 90 pages, but that's a science and a technology of how to create systems for the efficiency and the effectiveness of manufacturing. Again, that's a technique. Again, and when you look at the etymology of technique, again, it's going back to techne, right? It's the science, it's the art, it's the craft, it's the skill, it's the method. And so now, again, when you put it together with technique and not just technology, you're looking at really more of this process for practical purpose, for enhancement. So that's where I wanted people to see that, and even in the realm of Major League Baseball.
Yeah. Oh, I love that movie.
Yeah.
So that took us to the end of part 1, and you began part 2 by revisiting the question of, so based on these, how are we doing? How are we using tech to build flourishing? And you gave us this glimmers of hope and gloom of sin. Ooh.
Yep. Now,
hitting.
And I said it Saturday and at 9 a.m. It just didn't come out because I actually said it in a way at the 11 o'clock where Hollywood would have said the gloom of sin. Hollywood would not articulate it this way. Oh, now, okay. So again, they wouldn't have any concept of like when a gloom, sin, like. But what we see, what they are demonstrating in their projection in these movies are, yes, the glimmers of hope that technology brings, but ultimately it will never, and this is what Hollywood, I really believe in all of these movies, that they are demonstrating, is that there still is this looming gloom, and the reason why there's this looming gloom is because of sin. Now, the thing that I could have even went even further, okay, so not just Hollywood, but even so. There is this kind of this philosophical shift that has happened in the latter part of the 20th century and the 21st century called postmodernism. Mm-hmm. So postmodernism is a rejection of modernity or modernism. Now, where did modernity or modernism, where did it come from?
The Enlightenment. The
Enlightenment. Now, but where did the Enlightenment come from? The scientific revolution. Mm-hmm. So we talked about the scientific revolution last week. So between 1500 and 1700, you had the scientific revolution, who many of the pioneers of the scientific revolution were Christians, and they had a faith, a Christian faith worldview of how they engaged the sciences. But coming out of the scientific revolution was the Enlightenment, where then philosophers are like, man, we don't need God.
Yeah.
Look at how smart we are. Look at how rational we are. Look at our reason. Look at our intellect. And so coming now into this Enlightenment philosophy is we can create a utopia. So we can take all of these scientific discoveries and we can actually now innovate and create new technologies around medicine, around manufacturing, around all of these things that can enhance our life and enhance our cities, and we can usher in this golden age. We can usher in this utopia. And that's why Sigmund Freud is writing really at really kind of, I would say, the climax of the Enlightenment. Okay, and that's where he would say, well, these technologies that we have created, sure, they are a friend. But they're also a foe, because if it were not for these technologies, we wouldn't even need these technologies.
Yeah.
So it was also at the height of of this Enlightenment period, when I would say the early to mid 1900s, so early to mid 20th century. That's where we had two big world wars. You had World War I and then World War II. What in some sense ended World War II? The atomic bomb.
Yeah.
Okay, so now as we entered into this age of nuclear technology that could eliminate an entire city just like that. Now these postmoderns philosophers, they begin to reject the Enlightenment, because what the Enlightenment promised, it under-delivered. It promised peace, but it brought war. It promised the enhancement of life, but it has started to erode the stability of life. And so not only has Hollywood depicted how technology gives us glimmers of hope of a enhanced life, of a flourishing life, but ultimately it will underdeliver, and it will now give you the looming gloom. And why would it give you the looming gloom? Because of sin. That's exactly what postmodern philosophers have done when it comes to the Enlightenment philosophers. They promised that all of this and all of these new technologies would actually enhance life, that would usher in the golden age, that would usher in a utopia, but all it did was it under-delivered. Why? It was the gloom of sin. So not only do you have Hollywood saying that, you actually have postmodern philosophers that have rejected the modern philosophers of the 18th, 19th, and 20th century.
Yeah, really well said. So if I'm understanding correctly, I'm not sure if I've ever put it together this way. So we have the scientific revolution that really pointed to God,
What if God was the foundation for the revolution of this scientific development?
Yeah, so pointed to God as a source of truth, and so then you had the Enlightenment that really pushed back on that and said we don't need God. We don't need faith for that.
We can take this. We can take this across the finish line.
We can have truth without God, and then postmodernism said, well, hold on. Then they pushed back on the Enlightenment. Instead of swinging the pendulum back towards God, they seem like they push it further away from God and said, actually, we don't even know if we can determine truth at all.
Right. Well, and that's the thing about Western society. So Western society, like you have Western Europe, and obviously the U.S., Canada would be considered kind of Western society. So coming out of the Enlightenment, they're like, we don't need God. We can be agnostic or atheistic. Okay. So, but what they fail to realize is that everything that they're building on is actually embedded in absolute truth. It is embedded in a worldview. It's embedded in a narrative of the world. And so what they're doing is that they're actually moving away from the worldview, but they're using all of the positives of that worldview. And where postmoderns came in and basically said, well, what you promised, you actually weren't, you weren't able to deliver. And then then postmoderns actually, they actually embraced what the Enlightenment sold in terms of, okay, there's no absolute truth. Like, so if you're telling me there's no God, if you're telling me there's no overarching narrative, there's no full understanding, meaning of life, then everything goes. See, that's what people fail to realize in America that have moved away from God. You enjoy all of the positives of America that actually were rooted in the church. Now, again, I'm not saying that the church was perfect, but you have to understand that from the 5th century, so around the 400 to 500 AD, that's when the church assumed the position of authority in the Western Hemisphere. And so for 1,000 years, you have the church being the center of society. And again, I'm not saying it was perfect. They did a lot of things that did not reflect God well. But then with the scientific revolution from the 1500s to the 1700s, that's where, again, they're coming out of this Western culture that God played the central role in. But then after the 70s, really kind of towards the the beginning of the 1700s and then beyond, they're like, we don't need God. Look at and so started moving away, and then postmodernism just came in and basically adopted at least the mindset of the modern thinkers. We don't need God, and they actually took that across the finish line.
Sure.
But here's the thing. When you have a society, and this is what we're learning right now in America, when you have a society that is comprised of postmodern thinkers where there's no absolute truth, so therefore there's no absolute morality. Whatever an individual says goes, where there's no really understanding and overarching narrative of where society is supposed to be going, and therefore everybody does what is right in their own eyes, and so they're going to put together their well-ordered society however they want. Then there's no order. There's no common bond for a culture anymore. Because, okay, so think about it this way. This is why we do extra takes right here. So when you look at culture, you're creating the beliefs, you're creating the feelings, you're creating the stories that's going to make sense out of life for you. Okay? So as you progress into a civilized, so you need family units. You need, in some sense, these when I say smaller tribe, like that you need culture that is ordered and fashioned, that's making sense of your family. But think about, okay, and then when you have all of these families that are coming together to form a civilization, those families have to have this methodical, intentional way of ordering society. Well, here in America, and you see this in Europe, there is no longer order for a population, for a society to bring about an understanding. And so now that's the reason why we have all of these technologies, but depending on the individual and depending on the family unit or these pockets, when I say these tribal pockets of these different, subset cultures, because they're not using it in a different way, we live in such a divided society. We live in such a fragmented and fractured society. And so we will never, and this is the thing about America, and in some sense Europe, which is why in Africa you're seeing more of because they typically, they're looking at the culture as a whole, not the individual rights as the primary driver of culture. But which is why in America we'll like right now, unless these things change, we will never even begin to experience even glimmers of flourishing, because we are so divided because of the postmodernism that exists in our society.
Good conversation.
So,
all right, so I want to get to this next point, which is flourishing is embedded in creation.
Yeah.
This is where we got to your periodic table. So the question is, before you even mentioned epiphany, I had this written down. How did this periodic table epiphany come about?
Well, because raw materials. I'm like, okay, well, I remember, the raw materials are found on the periodic table.
Yeah.
So then I'm like, okay, well, how many? So this is part of where I use technology, because I'm not gifted in science. I just remember science. But this is where theology and my education, this is where it came together, all right? Because we talk about the raw materials all the time, okay?
Yeah.
And that subduing the earth is cultivating the raw materials. So I'm like, okay, well, all right, well, let me just see how many raw materials are there.
Yeah.
And so I pulled up the periodic table, and then this is where I started using ChatGPT and some other resource, because I just don't want to take ChatGPT as its word. I need to confirm it.
Sure.
So I confirmed it a couple other sources. But how many elements are in the periodic table? So 118. And then I'm like, okay, out of those 118, how many of them are natural elements that are found? Because there are some elements that have been formed in the lab, that have been created through, they call them synthetic elements. Okay, so then I found, and then
is that these?
Yeah, I would say it's these down here. I wanted to have a little fun and go, vibranium isn't found, because that's Wakanda forever. Yeah. Anyway, so that's
vibranium.
Vibranium is not on here. But yeah, so you got 92. Some, there were some sources that said 90, depending on the. I couldn't find a really good reason why one was 90, one was 92.
Okay.
But 90 to 92 raw elements.
You know, it would be fun.
What?
Have you try to pronounce some of these?
Yeah. Europeum, gadolinium,
Seaborgium.
Tungsten.
That one's easy.
Yeah, well, yeah. Then barium,
Francium.
Radium. Okay,
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah. We know these. Carbon,
that's where I wanted to say. Yeah.
Argon.
So that's where it came from, and I'm like, oh, okay. And then I'm like, okay, what? And then I knew what the elements were to form
H2O.
water.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I'm like, okay, so then I'm going, okay, what are the compound elements that are needed to form water?
You go down
water, air.
Yeah.
And then I started going down that, and I'm like, now my eyes are getting big.
You had never made that connection before.
Not like this. Not in a technology, because what is technology?
Yeah.
Technology is creating devices, it's creating tools, it's creating systems and methods and techniques for the practical purposes of life. Okay, so now when you're looking, okay, so God is forming these raw materials, He's speaking these raw materials into existence. And then as He speaks them, He is compounding them together in this scientific way. I mean, that's why I've said that God is the master chemist. He's the master master scientist.
Yeah.
He's the master botanist. He's the master architect. He's the master engineer.
Yeah.
He's because here's what he's doing. Not only is he speaking these raw materials into existence, he's literally speaking them into a compound to form air, to form water, to form Earth's crust and the minerals and the iron and all of that's going to be the rocks and the limestone and the sediments that we're going to need to actually form the tools, to form the instruments, to form and then my mind's going, oh my, I'm getting excited now just thinking about it because it blows my ever-loving mind that God, I could have went into just the complexity of the human brain. So if you just put into ChatGPT, give me the differences in which is more complex, give me the differences between a brain and a computer, and what is more complex. And it begins to spit out to you the complexity of our brain, because many times people have, people in explaining the brain have tried to, in some sense, liken it to a computer. There is no computer on planet Earth that has the capacity of our brain and can do what our brain does. And so God, through the raw materials, combined all of these raw materials to not only fashion our human body, but to actually fashion our brain and our heart and our skeletal system and our digestive system and all of the neurons. And I mean, it's just unbelievable, the technology that God created when he began to put all of these raw materials together.
Yeah, well said. And then to take it a step further, what's remarkable, he then invites us into it. Right? He invites us into joining him. So the difference here, it's a lot of differences, but one key difference is we cannot create raw materials like he can. But from the raw materials he creates, he invites us to...
Now, and what we can do, we can take the raw materials and we can create synthetic materials.
Yep.
Because, and that's where when you look at your food and when you look at your nutrients in your food and all of the ingredients, some of those are natural, some of those are processed, those are synthetic. They have been created in a lab. Okay, and this is part of where when you go, so we'll just go to there because we'll use that as an example.
Face off, great.
Okay, so all right, so a substance, food is a substance. Okay, so and again, please don't hear. I'm not trying to shame you. I'm not trying to bring conviction on you because listen, I love ice cream and I love Fruit Loops, and I'm telling you that sure, there are some natural ingredients, there are a lot of synthetic ingredients, but that's part of the way I want us to start thinking about it. Our food is a technology. Okay, a lot of the processed food is synthetic technology, and one of the things that we know is that if you eat more natural food, you will be healthier. Your body is able to process that natural food way better than if you were eating constant synthetic food. Okay, so that's a way of consuming. Now again, if you're creating, okay, because now we have, and that's why I love watching Shark Tank. We have creators that are trying to create, whether it's protein bars. And one of the things that I read recently is protein bars are typically unhealthier for you as protein shakes.
Oh,
okay.
Really?
So, well, and there's a whole, and again, I can't just regurgitate everything I learned there, but because I can't remember everything, but that was the takeaway. But okay, so if you're going to get into the realm of creating stuff that's healthier for you, then we need to think deeply about that, because you might be creating something that, sure, maybe it's healthier than a honey bun, but it has all of these synthetic ingredients in it that ultimately, if you consume it over time, it might not be healthier for you per se.
Yeah.
So again, that's just a way. I mean, again, that's a way that we ought to be thinking deeply about faith and technology. So you have. So we're also learning this in AI. We learned this, and when I say the mid 20th century, with the atomic bomb. Now, I wanted to show the clip of Oppenheimer, but it's a rated R movie, but it's based upon the true story of the guy who created the atomic bomb. he lived with basically guilt his entire life after the bomb was dropped. Because he had he had so cultivated and created this, but to know that tens and hundreds of thousands of people were dead in a second, he took that with him. Yeah. And so like that's even about the AI race now, is that okay? There's a lot of good that AI is going. There's a lot of good that AI does. There will be a lot of dangers of AI too. That's in any technology. And so we have to think deeply about what we are creating.
Yeah, so we already kind of started talking about it, but the last question, I wanted to take us to the tech face-off homework.
Yeah.
And I wanted to just ask, and you answer this partly, but let's talk a little bit more about it. How do we practically put this into place in our everyday life? So any additional thoughts on digging into...
Yeah, which one would you have? Yeah, which one would you have?
Let's see. Let's look at that one.
So you got so each one was supposed to reflect the movie.
Okay.
So you have the digital virtual, space that was supposed to reflect Ready Player One.
Yeah.
Then you had the substances that was supposed to reflect Limitless, and that pill that was NZT that was supposed to activate the brain and allow the brain to work at 100%.
Yep.
And the guy had, the guy in the movie played by Bradley Cooper, he had abused it. And we saw at that scene, both of them had abused it.
Yeah.
And one never recovered. And even at the end, it was a weird ending because, well, he says he was off of it, but I don't think he was. So it was weird. So he, in some sense, managed to. I don't know. It was just a weird ending.
Okay.
But nevertheless, we saw that scene where, again, if he ended it, then that's great. He was able to activate his brain without the medication. Which, okay, then that's great. You found a way. Okay, perfect. You found a way to be human without. Without an enhanced substance, okay?
Yeah.
So, but again, I put here, like, there are some things that you're going to reject. I mean, I don't know if there's any good that cigarettes would bring. I even put alcohol. I do not believe that drinking alcohol is a sin. Now, it's interesting now, even more and more science is coming out of how alcohol affects so many things about our humanity, our body. Yeah. But it will affect your sleep. It will actually affect your brain in terms of making it, click, like function on all cylinders. But I want to, I just want us to know, if you hey, I like to have a drink every now and then. Okay, just make sure it's moderately. Mm-hmm. Okay. But informationally, you need to know that, hey, there's going to be some things. Yeah. There might be some side effects here. Medication. I'm actually all for medicine. Yeah. I think there are good medicinal technologies that have been created to help cure things, to help us live with some of some of the illnesses that we might have just living in a fallen world. I think that's good, but I think you need, and that's where if you're creating, we have some actually pharmaceutical people in here. Hey, don't stop, but let's make sure that we know what we're producing. We're producing the information. Yeah. Hey, but it is interesting. Sometimes you see these commercials about these pills, and then it starts listing out all the side effects. You're like, does the side effects, if you started experiencing these side effects, do they outweigh the actual what it helps? I don't know. So
let's look at the second two, because I think the first two are pretty self-explanatory.
So this is creation care. Yeah. Okay. So, and this is part of and I didn't get to it because I do want to be cautious because I think there are a lot of people that live over here on the right-hand side, and they live under man's glory, and they worship creation. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I say. So they'll say, well, they'll worship it in an idolatrous way because they will see it more as a pantheistic kind of worldview that we need we need to care for Mother Earth as if so we do think, so we would say as believers that yes, that Earth is a living organism. It's not a living God, or it's not a living, when I say force, that we need to be one with, as if we're living in a Star Wars age. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're not over here.
Yeah.
But there are many people that we don't even need to care for creation. Who cares about creation? Well, we ought to care for creation.
Yeah.
We ought not worship creation. And so that's where educationally we ought to know how our technologies are actually affecting the atmosphere, how it is affecting cities, okay? How it is affecting our air quality. We ought to be concerned about that. So therefore, we ought to care for it. We ought to be prudent. Okay, so and part of prudent and sacrificial is I know it's just much easier to put everything in one garbage can. But what's the prudent thing and what's the sacrificial thing to care well for creation? Well, let's recycle. And when I say sacrificial, yeah, it might actually cost you. Like it costs us. It costs us more monthly to have a recycling bin. Okay, so but as Christians, we care for the environment. So we're going to do the prudent thing and the sacrificial thing. We're going to recycle, thrifty. So there's this thing that is a trend right now, is thrifting, where we're recycling the clothes, but we're taking the recycling clothes and we're enhancing them. Or we're taking the recycled material and we're enhancing them. So this is where I would really encourage believers to think about, how can you thrift? How can you recycle in a way to take these discarded materials and to actually enhance them? That's one of the things that I love that we're going to do in Mercy Road. We're going to launch a thrift store, but one of the things that I'm hoping that we can do as we launch a thrift store is that we have when I say a thrifting kind of side, where we've taken these used clothes that people have given, and then we've created new and improved clothes from them.
Yeah,
that's called thrifting.
Yeah.
So again, that's just a way for us to care and to enhance.
Yeah.
And then that also enhances the economy, because now we can provide jobs for maybe the single moms, maybe for the Bridges of America guys, maybe for our Mephibo's house adults.
Yeah.
So again, that's a way of leveraging technology.
That's awesome. Yeah, and this slide right here, I think there's a good example.
Oh.
Go back to the one. Yeah. That's just a good example of entering into the messy middle, like we've talked about before. Creation care has become a severely politicized. Just talking about it, you have the possibility to fall on one side or the other, and it's the way you just talked about it here is helpful in like delving into, hey, it may be messy, but it doesn't mean that we need to just avoid it, but we can think deeply about it.
Yeah. Well, and think about even cleaner and safer. I mean, because this is a debate about electric cars and gas cars and stuff like that. And I'm trying to remember some of the research that, like, just because it's an electric car doesn't mean that the plants that they have to make and create and all of the process of making it doesn't necessarily mean that it's cleaner.
Interesting.
So again, I don't know all of the nuances about that, but sometimes, I mean, and this is part of where Christians do their homework, and I hate, like, and here's the thing, like, I really do, I lament the fact that we live in a culture where we cannot just trust people at face value anymore. Because people who own gas-powered cars, obviously they're going to be pro-gas-powered cars. People who own the electric cars, they're going to be like, and then they're going to make it like, say, well, this is safer. No, this is safer. This is cleaner. No, this is cleaner. But I do think that that's where, if we can get into this, and again, I'm not asking, 3,000 of us to always read the science, but this is part of where, just because one person says it's cleaner and safer doesn't necessarily mean it's cleaner and safer, or that there aren't unintended consequences to electric cars.
Sure. Yeah, I think the takeaway for this, and and maybe we'll wrap up here, is I think you're giving us, obviously, every single week we have a breadth of information, right? We've talked about this before. This week is no different. Even these 4 slides, there's a breadth of information. And each of these slides is going to hit different with different people. I think a slide like this one and others could give us just the license of, hey, as a believer, we can think deeply about this topic, right?
Yeah.
And if this is something that you are passionate about, you don't have to separate your belief from this, right?
Yeah.
It can actually, you can view your career, you can view your hobby, your passions through the lens of the gospel, and it can actually help inform, as opposed to you kind of setting it aside because it has to do with science or technology or what. So that's a kind of a big takeaway I have is whether it's creation care, whether it's science, the periodic table, whether it's substances, whether it's strategies, in the business world. There's so much for us to think about and talk about that each of us, different aspects of this conversation probably resonated differently with each of us.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
anything with this last one?
Well, I would just say systems. I mean, you can apply that actually in your family. Let's say you're raising teenagers and you're reading a book about, techniques about how to, that would be a system. That would be a technique. Now, again, like the Bible talks about honoring your father and mother. It talks about, fathers don't do anything to exasperate your children.
Yeah.
Okay, so we know the theology. Okay, but what are ways to actually engage better with our kids, to parent our kids better? This is where you want to be open. If there's a better way for me to parent my teenager after the image and likeness of Christ, I want to do it. I don't want to be closed off to it. Same thing, in the church world, and this one of the things that sometimes frustrates me about churches is when you study the New Testament does not give you when I say a prescription of, when I say bylaws and this and that and how, the New Testament basically gives you a framework of the offices of the church, the office of elder/pastor. And ultimately, they oversee. They're driving the theology. They're driving the teaching. They're driving the ministry. You have the deacons they're the ones caring for when I say the health of the body, meeting the needs of orphans and widows and those who might need more care. Okay, so that's what we know. We have these 2 offices, and then we have this understanding of, in some sense, leadership capacities within the church of, they're apostles, they're prophets, they're evangelists, they're shepherds, they're teachers to equip the people of the work of the ministry. But when you bring it all together in a structure or a system or a method, there's no prescription. So what we have done in the, in some sense, the 19th, 20th century and now the 21st century, when we create bylaws, those bylaws aren't scripture. If those bylaws no longer work for you in the advancement of God's ministry and mission in the world, you might want to change them. And so I've seen so many church leaders and people in the church that they are more protective of the bylaws than they are of the scriptures. And it's kind of like, what are you doing? So this is kind of where it's kind of like, if we as a church, we ought to constantly be open to the better ways that we can be structured, the systems that we can implement so that we can be better and more effective and efficient at carrying out the ministry and mission of God here. And so that's just, again, that's just a system and technique. But a lot of churches get to the point of like the Major League Baseball. No, they don't know what, and then they're just so resistant to any new system that would come in to maybe enhance the way we do things. And so that could be in business, that could be in a lot of different places. So that's where systems and methods and techniques are technologies that can enhance our calling. And so I just want us to be open and humble and studious. That's the whole idea. One of our core values is we study scalability. So if God has called us to multiply, well, we ought to study how we multiply, So, anyways, that's the last, that was the last slide. And so, I hope, here's my hope and prayer, is that you wouldn't be bored by it, this series, because I don't know if this series hits as deeply as the series we did last year of the church in a divided democracy. But technology intersects our life every single day, just like our politics do. And we ought to be thinking about those things as well. So, well, Northland family and friends, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Extra Takes. Until next week, blessings.
Thanks for listening to Extra Takes. Be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you won't miss a single episode.